A quiet morning in an elite hospital is shattered by an unexpected act of cruelty. A pregnant woman is brutally attacked by her husband's mistress, turning the consultation room into an emotional battlefield. As the mother's and baby's lives hang by a thread, a long-buried family secret resurfaces to change the course of everything. What begins as silence and abandonment transforms into justice, courage, and a name that will echo forever in history. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The morning sun streamed through the wide windows of St. Raphael's Hospital in London, casting a soft light that contrasted with the cold air conditioning. Marina Anderson sat in the examination room on the 5th floor, awaiting the ultrasound results. Her hands rested on her 7-month pregnant belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. It was a girl. She had known for 3 months, but hadn't yet chosen a name. Or rather, she hadn't managed to discuss it with Richard Foster, her husband, the man who once made her believe in fairy tales and happy endings, the successful businessman who ran one of London's largest construction companies, the man who now barely looked at her, who replaced conversations with cold notes delivered by Sonia, his personal assistant. Marina sighed, adjusting the light blue dress she was wearing. She remembered when she discovered the pregnancy, how she rushed to his office to tell him the news. Richard had smiled, but it was a distant, polite smile, like someone acknowledging an unrequested gift. Months passed, and the distance between them only grew. Dinners for two became solitary meals. Romantic trips turned into corporate commitments from which she was excluded. Marina tried to talk, tried to understand, tried to save what was left of that marriage. But Richard always had a ready excuse, an unpostponable meeting, an important client. And she, pregnant and increasingly fragile, retreated into silence. That morning, she was alone again. Richard had promised to accompany her to the examination, but sent a message through his secretary saying that an unforeseen issue at the construction site required his immediate presence. Marina was no longer surprised. She had learned to expect nothing from him. The pregnancy, which should have been a moment of togetherness, had turned into the last thread still connecting them, and even that thread was rapidly unraveling. The room door opened, and Marina looked up, expecting to see the doctor with the results. But it was Richard who entered. He wore an impeccable grey suit, his hair perfectly combed, the upright posture of someone accustomed to commanding. For an instant, Marina's heart filled with hope. He had come. Perhaps there was still a chance for them. Perhaps he really cared. But then she saw the woman who entered right behind him, Fiona Davies. Marina recognized her immediately, though they had never been formally introduced. She was Richard's former partner, the woman who had worked with him in the construction company's early years, before they sold their first major development that made them millionaires. Fiona was tall, elegant, with perfectly straightened brown hair falling over her shoulders. She wore a tight red dress that accentuated every curve of her body, high heels echoing on the hospital's cold floor. There was something deliberate about her appearance, as if every detail had been chosen to make an impact. Marina felt her stomach churn, not because of the woman's presence itself, but because of the intimacy with which she touched Richard's arm, the way he allowed that touch without pulling away. "Richard, what's going on?" Marina tried to keep her voice steady, but noticed the tremor that betrayed her. "I came to bring someone to meet you." Richard spoke with a coldness Marina had never heard before. Fiona wanted to pay a visit. A visit? Marina looked at the woman, who watched her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To the hospital now?" Fiona stepped forward, crossing her arms. "I thought it was important for us to meet, Marina. After all, we're both part of Richard's life, aren't we? She and I have a lot of history together." The tone was sweet, but there was poison in the words. Marina felt her legs weaken. She tried to stand from the chair, but her heavy belly made movements difficult. She leaned on the nearby table, taking a deep breath. "Richard, please, explain what's happening here. This is neither the time nor the place for this." Fiona laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the room's silence. Not the time. I think it's past time, darling. Did you really think he was happy about this pregnancy? That he was going to play happy family with you? Marina felt tears burn her eyes. She looked at Richard, hoping he would say something, that he would defend his wife, that he would put an end to that humiliation. But he remained silent, looking at the floor, his hands in his pockets. Richard and I never stopped seeing each other, Marina, Fiona continued, moving closer. Even after he married you, even throughout this entire pregnancy. Do you think those business trips were really just business? That the nights he came home late were because of meetings? Each word was a stab. Marina gripped the edge of the table tighter, feeling the room spin around her. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be happening there at that moment, while she carried his daughter inside her. You don't have the right, Marina whispered, but her voice came out too weak. You don't have the right to come in here and what, tell the truth? Fiona interrupted, her voice rising. You live in a fantasy, Marina. Do you think a signed paper and a pregnant belly guarantee anything? Richard was never yours. He was always mine. Marina looked at her husband again, imploring with her eyes for him to deny it, to say that it was all a lie, a product of jealousy or resentment, but Richard remained silent, inert, as if he were merely a spectator of that cruel scene. You know what's funnier, Fiona continued, and now there was open cruelty in her expression. He only stayed with you because of his public image, the successful businessman with his pregnant wife, building an empire and a family. But you're just a prop, Marina, a pretty detail for magazine photos. Marina felt something break inside her. It wasn't just the heartbreak of betrayal, but the devastating realization that she might never have been truly loved, that the last years of her life had been a carefully constructed lie. Get out of here, Marina said, gathering all the strength she still had. Both of you, get out of my sight now. Fiona smiled, satisfied at having provoked that reaction, but she made no move to leave. Instead, she took another step towards Marina, completely invading her personal space. Or what? What are you going to do, Marina? Cry? Tell Mummy? Fiona's voice was pure venom now. You're pathetic. Always have been. A fragile little woman who never had anything to offer but a fertile womb. The silence that followed was dense, charged with a tension that seemed to suck all the air from the room. Marina felt the child stir within her, as if perceiving her mother's despair. She placed her hands protectively over her belly, trying to move away from Fiona. But the woman kept advancing, her eyes gleaming with an ancient rage Marina couldn't comprehend. It was as if all of Fiona's pain, all her resentment and all her bitterness had finally found a target. And Marina, pregnant, vulnerable and alone, was that perfect target. Marina tried to move, to put more distance between herself and Fiona, but her pregnant body didn't respond with the agility she needed. She felt trapped, vulnerable, exposed. The examination room, which minutes before had seemed a tranquil refuge, had turned into a trap. Fiona, let's go. Richard finally spoke, but his voice carried no authority. It was almost a plea, weak and without conviction. Now, you speak? Fiona turned abruptly to him. Now that everything that needed to be said has been said? No, Richard. You brought me here. You said it was time to end this farce. So let's end it. Marina felt her legs weaken even further. He brought her here. Was all this planned? She looked at Richard, searching for some sign of remorse, of humanity, but found only the evasive gaze of a man who had lost the courage to face the consequences of his choices. Why? Marina asked, and her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Why do this? Here now I'm pregnant, Richard. Pregnant with your daughter. That's exactly why, Fiona answered for him. Because you need to understand that this child won't change anything. It won't make him a better husband. It won't save this pathetic marriage. It won't turn you into someone important in his life. Marina felt something burn in her chest, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and despair. She looked at the door, calculating if she could reach it, call someone, ask for help. But Fiona was between her and the exit, blocking any possibility of escape. You're jealous, Marina said, trying to find some logic in that cruel attack. You're jealous because he chose me, because I'm expecting his child. Fiona laughed again, But this time the sound was even more bitter. "Jealous? Of you? Darling, you don't understand anything. Richard didn't choose you, he used you. Just as he's using this pregnancy to maintain the family man image that investors love. But when the cameras turn off, when the magazines stop photographing, he's with me." Every word was calculated to hurt, to destroy. Marina felt tears stream down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She was too tired to keep up appearances, tired of pretending everything was fine when her world was falling apart. "And you know what's worse?" Fiona continued, moving even closer. "He told me everything. How you beg for attention, how you wait for him to come home, how you try to save a marriage that never truly existed. It's pathetic, Marina, you're pathetic." Marina felt something shatter inside her. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal or the humiliation of the cruel words. It was the devastating realization that she had wasted years of her life with a man who never loved her, who saw her only as a convenient piece in his carefully constructed life. "Enough," Marina said, and for the first time her voice came out firm. "Enough. Both of you get out of here now. I don't care what you have. I don't care how long this has been going on, but you won't do this here in front of me while I'm expecting my daughter." Fiona took a step forward, further invading Marina's personal space. "Your daughter? Do you think this child will be your salvation? That it will guarantee your place in his life?" "Yes," Marina replied, placing her hands protectively over her belly. "She is my daughter, and I will protect her from people like you." Fiona's face contorted into an expression of pure rage. There was something uncontrolled in her eyes now, a fury that went beyond jealousy or resentment. It was as if all the frustration of years, all the bitterness of having been cast aside when Richard decided to marry, had exploded at that moment. "Protect?" Fiona spat the word. "You can't even protect yourself." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Fiona raised her leg, her high heel forming a deadly weapon, and before Marina could react or defend herself, she felt the violent impact against her belly. The pain was instantaneous and devastating, radiating from her abdomen throughout her entire body. Marina tried to hold on to the table, but her fingers slipped, and she fell, her body hitting the hospital's cold floor with a thud. The world spun around her. Marina heard a distant sound, realizing only after a few seconds that it was the fetal heart monitor disconnecting. The cable had come loose with the fall, but the sudden silence where before there had been the rhythmic sound of the baby's heartbeat was terrifying. "My baby," Marina whispered, her hands trying to reach her belly. "Please, my baby." She looked up and saw Richard standing, completely motionless, like a statue. His eyes were wide, but he didn't move, didn't come to help her, did absolutely nothing. He just watched, paralyzed, as his pregnant wife bled on the floor. "Richard," Marina pleaded, extending a trembling hand towards him. "Please help. The baby. Our daughter." But he remained motionless, and at that moment, Marina understood with devastating clarity that she was completely alone. The man she had married, with whom she had dreamed of, building a family, was incapable of even helping her in the most critical moment of her life. Fiona had recoiled a few steps, her eyes also wide, but there was no remorse in her expression. There was something closer to panic, the realization that she had gone too far, that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. "She slipped," Fiona suddenly said, her voice sounding strange and high-pitched. "It was an accident. She slipped and fell." Marina tried to speak, to deny that absurd lie, but the words wouldn't come out. The pain was too intense, consuming every thought, every movement. She felt something warm and wet trickling between her legs, and terror gripped her. Blood. It was blood. "Someone!" she managed to scream, using all the air left in her lungs. "Please, someone help me!" "I tried to hold her," Fiona continued, speaking more to Richard than to Marina. "I tried, but she fell. It was an accident, Richard. You saw, it was an accident." Richard finally moved, but not towards Marina. He took a step back, then another, as if trying to distance himself from that scene, from that moment that would destroy everything he had built. Marina felt consciousness begin to slip away, The pain, the blood, the fear for her daughter, everything was becoming too heavy. She tried to stay awake, tried to keep calling for help, but her body was failing. And then, as if the universe had finally heard her prayers, the door burst open. Julia, the morning shift nurse, rushed in, her eyes immediately taking in the horrific scene before her. Marina on the floor, blood spreading, the monitor disconnected, and two people watching without doing anything to help. "My God!" Julia cried, rushing to Marina and kneeling beside her. "What happened here? Someone call the doctor. Code red in examination room 5. Now." She pressed the emergency button on the wall, and immediately the hospital corridors erupted into movement. Alarms blared, voices shouted, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Julia quickly checked Marina's vital signs, her trained hands working with precision even in the face of that emergency. "Stay with me, dear," Julia said, her voice firm but gentle. "It's going to be okay. We're taking care of you and your baby." But Marina could barely hear her. Her vision was darkening at the edges, the world becoming distant and hazy. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Richard's face, still standing by the door, watching everything with an expression of helpless horror that had arrived too late to make any difference. St. Raphael's Hospital plunged into controlled chaos. The medical team responded with the precision of those who had trained for years for moments like this, but there was a different urgency in the air. Marina was quickly placed on a stretcher, with Julia holding her hand and speaking words of encouragement that she could barely hear. The corridors blurred into white lights and urgent voices. 7-month pregnant woman with abdominal trauma, possible placental abruption, one of the doctors shouted as the stretcher was pushed towards the elevator. "Prepare the operating theater, obstetrics team on standby." Marina opened her eyes for a brief moment, trying to focus on something, anything that would keep her anchored to reality. She saw unfamiliar faces leaning over her, hands checking her blood pressure, voices giving orders she didn't understand. "My daughter," she whispered, the words barely coming out. "Save my daughter." "We'll save both of you," a female voice replied. It was Dr. Camilla Stone, Marina's obstetrician. She had just arrived at the hospital when she received the emergency call. "Stay with me, Marina. I need you to stay with me." While Marina was being taken to the operating theater, the hospital's 5th floor transformed into an impromptu investigation scene. Fiona and Richard were still in the examination room when 2 security guards arrived, preventing their departure. Julia, who had been the first to help Marina, was giving her statement to the head of security. "When I entered the room, the patient was on the floor bleeding," Julia spoke, her voice trembling slightly from adrenaline. "These 2 people were there just watching. They weren't trying to help, they hadn't called anyone. The patient was alone, fallen on the floor." "That's not true," Fiona interrupted, her voice now defensive. "She slipped. It was an accident. I tried to help her, but she fell before I could do anything." The head of security, a middle-aged man named Charles, looked at her with an inscrutable expression. "I'll need both of you to remain here until we can clarify what happened. We have security cameras on this floor." The mention of cameras made Fiona visibly pale. Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "That's not necessary. It was an accident, as she said. My wife slipped. There's nothing to investigate." Charles crossed his arms. "With all due respect, sir, you don't decide that. We have a pregnant patient who suffered serious trauma. This is hospital protocol in such cases. We need to review the footage and understand exactly what happened." In the operating theater, Marina was being prepared for an emergency C-section. Dr. Camilla worked quickly but carefully, her experienced hands assessing the situation. The baby's heart was beating but irregularly. There were signs of fetal distress. Every second counted. "We need to get this baby out now," Camilla told the team. "Prepare the neonatal intensive care unit. We'll need immediate support for the child." As the final preparations were made, the operating theater door opened, and a tall, grey-haired man with an imposing posture rushed in. It was Dr. Edward Miller, clinical director of St. Raphael's Hospital. He had been called to supervise the case as soon as they received the notification of an obstetric emergency with possible intentional trauma. "Patient status," he asked, approaching the operating table. "Abdominal trauma with possible assault," Camilla replied. "Partially detached placenta, fetal distress. We are proceeding with an emergency C-section." Edward began reviewing the data on the monitor when his gaze fell upon the patient's chart. The name highlighted at the top made his heart stop for an instant. Marina Anderson. He picked up the chart with trembling hands, reading again to make sure he wasn't mistaken. Mother's name, Helen Anderson. "It can't be," he murmured. "Doctor." Camilla looked at him, concerned by his sudden pallor. "Do you know the patient?" Edward didn't answer immediately. His hands gripped the chart so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Marina Anderson, Helen's daughter. His niece. The girl he hadn't seen for over 15 years, since that terrible family quarrel that had divided the family and created an abyss of silence between the siblings. "She's my niece," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "Marina is my niece." The silence that followed in the operating theater was heavy. Everyone knew that hospital protocol discouraged doctors from treating close relatives, especially in high-risk surgeries. The possibility of judgment being compromised by emotion was too great. But they also knew that Edward was one of the best surgeons in the hospital, and that Marina needed all the help she could get. "Dr. Miller," Camilla began, careful with her words, "perhaps it would be better for another doctor to take over the case, given your relationship with the patient." Edward looked at Marina, unconscious on the operating table. He saw in her face traces of the girl he remembered, but he also saw a woman he didn't know, who had grown up and lived an entire life without him around. 15 years. 15 years of absence due to pride, to resentment, to a quarrel whose reasons now seemed completely insignificant in the face of that life hanging by a thread. "No," he said firmly. "I will participate in this surgery. This is my niece and my responsibility as a doctor. I will save her." Camilla nodded, understanding there was no time for debate. "Then let's begin. Nurse, anesthesia." The surgery began in tense silence. Edward's hands worked with mechanical precision, but his mind was elsewhere. He remembered Marina as a child, playing in Helen's garden. He remembered family Sundays, when everyone gathered for lunches that lasted hours. He remembered the last time he saw Helen, the harsh words they exchanged, their mutual decision to distance themselves. And now, 15 years later, his sister's daughter was there, fighting for her life, carrying a child who might never get to know the world. "Uncle," Marina murmured suddenly, her voice weak but audible. She had partially woken from the anesthesia, her eyes half closed, trying to focus on something. "Uncle Edward?" Edward froze. She recognized him. Even after all these years, even in that state, she recognized him. "I'm here, Marina," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm here and I'm going to take care of you." "My daughter," Marina whispered, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. "Please, save my daughter." "I'll save both of you," Edward promised. "It's a promise." The anesthesiologist increased the dosage and Marina lost consciousness again. But that brief moment of recognition, that unexpected connection across time and silence, gave Edward renewed determination. He wasn't going to leave his niece, not this time, not ever again. The baby was delivered minutes later, small and fragile, but alive. Her cry filled the operating theater, a sound that brought tears to the eyes of more than one professional present. The neonatal team immediately took her for evaluation, but the initial signs were promising. Her heart was beating strongly. Her lungs were working. Marina, for her part, was stable, but still in a delicate condition. The trauma had caused internal bleeding that needed to be controlled. Edward worked meticulously, his hands never trembling, despite the emotional storm he felt within. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, Charles had accessed the security camera recordings. What he saw in the footage made him frown deeply. There was no doubt about what had happened. The corridor camera captured the perfect angle of the examination room's half-open door. It clearly showed Fiona advancing towards Marina and delivering the kick. Charles watched the footage several times, ensuring there was no ambiguity in what he saw. The camera didn't lie. Fiona had deliberately assaulted a pregnant woman, and Richard had witnessed everything without doing absolutely anything to stop or help. He saved the file on 3 different devices, ensuring the evidence was secure, and then called the hospital administration. 2 hours later, while Marina was still in surgery, the hospital conference room was full. Besides Charles and the administrative director, there were legal representatives from the hospital and 2 police officers who had been called to file a police report. Fiona and Richard were separated and waited in different rooms. When Charles showed the images to those present, the silence that followed was absolute. There was no denying it, no reinterpreting what was clearly recorded. The administrative director, Dr. Beatrice Cross, a woman with a firm gaze and decisive posture, was the first to speak. "This is unacceptable. Inside our hospital, a vulnerable patient was deliberately assaulted." She looked at the police officers. "I want an inquiry opened immediately, and I want these people prevented from leaving until they give formal statements." One of the police officers, Detective Mark Stone, nodded. He was already preparing the paperwork. "We'll need copies of these images in addition to the statements from everyone involved, including the medical team who attended the victim." Meanwhile, as this unfolded behind the administrative scenes of the hospital, something completely unexpected was developing on social media. One of the junior security guards, John, had recognized Fiona Davies when he saw her on the 5th floor. She was a well-known digital influencer with over 2 million followers, an ambassador for several luxury brands, and a vocal advocate for social causes. Her public image was impeccable, carefully constructed over years. John, without thinking of the consequences, had discreetly taken a photo of Fiona being escorted by security and posted it in a private hospital staff group with the caption, "Guess who's here and seems to have gotten into serious trouble." What he didn't expect was that one of the members of that group, Amanda, a nursing technician, had a cousin who worked for a major online gossip magazine. Amanda passed on the information, mentioning that there were rumors Fiona had assaulted a pregnant patient. In a matter of minutes, the news began to spread. By 4 in the afternoon, when Marina finally came out of surgery and was taken to the ICU, the hashtag FionaExposedUK was already trending on Twitter. Thousands of people speculated about what had happened, shared their own negative experiences with famous influencers, and demanded that the truth come to light. It was at that moment that the unthinkable happened. An anonymous hospital employee, never identified, leaked the security camera video, not the full video, but a 30-second clip clearly showing the moment of the assault. The video was posted on an anonymous Twitter account and, in less than an hour, had been viewed over 5 million times. The reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Fiona's face, once associated with glamour and philanthropy, became a symbol of cruelty. The comments were relentless. Brands that sponsored her began to publicly distance themselves, publishing statements about not tolerating violence. Events cancelled her participation. Her follower count plummeted as thousands of people unfollowed her every minute. At the hospital, Edward finally emerged from the operating theatre. He had spent 4 hours on his feet, working meticulously to ensure both Marina and the baby survived. He was exhausted, but there was a sense of relief mixed with concern. He had done everything he could. Now, it depended on Marina's strength. "How is she?" Camilla asked, finding him in the corridor. "Stable. The bleeding is controlled. There was no permanent damage to internal organs, but she went through severe trauma. She'll need time to recover, both physically and emotionally." Edward rubbed his face with his hands. "And the baby?" "She's in the neonatal ICU, but the signs are good. She was born weighing 2 kilos and 400 grams, a little below ideal for her gestational age. But her lungs are working well. There are no signs of neurological compromise. She's a fighter, that girl." Edward nodded, feeling the weight of 15 years of absence pressing on his chest. "I need to call Helen. She needs to know." Helen Anderson received the call as she was leaving work. She worked as a literature teacher at a private school in London, the same profession she had held for over 20 years. When she saw the unknown number on the screen, she almost didn't answer, but something made her accept the call. "Hello?" "Helen, "It's Edward." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Edward, after 15 years without any contact, almost gave up waiting for a response. But then he heard his sister's voice, tense and suspicious. "Edward, what do you want?" "It's about Marina. She's in the hospital. There was an incident. She and the baby are fine now. But you need to come." "What baby?" Helen asked. And Edward realized she didn't know. Marina was pregnant and hadn't told her own mother. "My God, Marina, what happened?" Edward quickly explained the situation, omitting for now the most disturbing details of the assault. He simply said there was an obstetric emergency, that Marina had suffered trauma, and that he had participated in the surgery. He heard the shock in Helen's voice, followed by a steely determination. "I'm coming now. Which hospital?" "St. Raphael's, ICU on the 5th floor." Half an hour later, Helen practically ran through the hospital doors. Edward was waiting for her at reception. When their eyes met, time seemed to stop. There stood two siblings who had been inseparable in their youth, who had shared secrets and dreams, but who had allowed pride and harsh words to keep them apart for a decade and a half. Helen arrived first, crossing the space that separated them. Without a word, she embraced her brother. Edward, surprised for a moment, returned the hug. He felt tears burn his eyes. "Is she okay?" Helen asked when she finally pulled away. "She'll be. She's strong, like you." "And the baby?" "A girl. Premature, but fighting." Helen covered her face with her hands, tears finally escaping. "Marina was pregnant and I didn't even know. What kind of mother am I that my own daughter didn't tell me she was expecting a baby?" "That doesn't matter now," Edward said gently. "What matters is that she needs you, both of them do." He guided Helen to the ICU, explaining along the way the medical details of the surgery and Marina's current condition, but he waited until they were in a private setting to tell her about the assault and the circumstances that led to that emergency. When he finally revealed the truth, Helen's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a cold, controlled determination that Edward knew well. It was the same expression she had as a child when someone tried to bully her on the playground. Helen never backed down from injustice. "Who was it?" Helen asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Who did this to my daughter?" Edward told her about Fiona and Richard, about the security camera footage, about the video that had leaked on social media. He watched Helen's expression harden with each detail revealed. Marina slowly opened her eyes, fighting against the weight of the anesthesia that still blurred her senses. The first thing she saw was the hospital's white ceiling, the soft lights, the constant sound of monitors around her. She tried to move, but her body felt like lead. A dull pain radiated from her abdomen, immediately reminding her of what had happened. "My baby," she whispered, and immediately felt a warm hand hold hers. "She's fine," a familiar voice answered. "She's alive and fighting, my daughter." Marina turned her head and saw her mother sitting beside the bed. Helen's eyes were red and swollen, but there was a deep relief on her face. "Mother," Marina murmured, new tears beginning to flow. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you." "No." Helen squeezed her hand tighter. "I'm the one who's sorry. For not being present, for not having realized you were going through this alone. But I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere." "The baby," Marina insisted. "Can I see her?" "Soon. She's in the neonatal ICU, but the doctors say she's responding well. She's a warrior like her mother." It was at that moment that Marina noticed another figure in the corner of the room, a tall, grey-haired man wearing a white lab coat. It took a few seconds for her clouded brain to process who it was. "Uncle Edward." Her voice came out weak, incredulous. Edward approached the bed, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "Hi, Marina. It's been a long time. You operated. You saved me. Me and an amazing team. But yes, I was there." Marina felt a wave of emotion wash over her, Edward and Helen together in the same room after 15 years of silence, and all because of her, because of that terrible moment that had somehow reconnected a fragmented family. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The following days were a whirlwind of physical recovery and disturbing revelations. Marina learned about the video that had leaked, about the public reaction, about how her story had become national. Nurses entered her room and said they were praying for her. Unknown people sent flowers and messages of support. The hashtag Justice for Marina joined Fiona Exposed UK in the trending topics. But none of that mattered as much as seeing her daughter for the first time. When she finally had the strength to be taken to the neonatal ICU, Marina was paralyzed before the incubator. There she was, her little warrior, tiny but alive, fighting with every breath. "She's perfect," Marina said through tears, touching the incubator glass as if she could transmit her love through it. "And she needs a name," Helen said softly beside her. "Have you thought of one?" Marina looked at her daughter, thinking of everything they had been through together, even before birth. She thought of the strength she needed to have, the fight for survival, the hope that remained lit even in the darkest moments. "Victoria," she finally said. "Her name is Victoria." While Marina recovered, the outside world continued to boil. Richard desperately tried to control the damage to his reputation, but every move he made only worsened the situation. He offered money to the hospital security guard to delete the original footage, but Charles categorically refused and reported the bribery attempt to the authorities. The news leaked to the press, and Richard went from passive accomplice to active villain. The construction company he ran began to lose contracts. Investors pulled out, citing ethical concerns. A former trusted employee, Carla Miller, who had worked as the couple's executive secretary for 5 years, gave an explosive interview to a television program. "I warned Mr. Foster several times about Ms. Davies' unstable behavior," Carla revealed before the cameras. "She constantly sought me out, wanting to know his schedule, where he was, who he was talking to. She made scenes at company events when he paid attention to other women. I reported this to Mr. Foster on at least 3 different occasions. He told me not to worry, that he knew how to handle her, that it was part of her strong personality." The interview was devastating. It showed that Richard had not only been negligent at the moment of the assault, but had ignored clear signs that Fiona posed a danger. The narrative shifted from a case of omission to one of conscious and deliberate negligence. Fiona, meanwhile, was in pre-trial detention. Her lawyer tried to argue that she posed no flight risk, but the judge disagreed. The severity of the assault, the fact that the victim was a pregnant woman, and Richard's documented attempt to destroy evidence were considered indicative that both could try to obstruct justice. On the 5th day after surgery, Marina received a visit from the prosecutor in charge of the case, Dr. Patricia Allen. She was a woman in her early 40s, with black hair pulled back in a severe bun, a determined gaze that inspired confidence. "Marina, I know you're still recovering, but I need your official statement." Patricia spoke gently, but also seriously. "What happened in that room will be crucial for the case." Marina took a deep breath, preparing to relive those terrible moments. Helen held her hand, giving her strength, and then, with a firm voice, despite the tears that occasionally escaped, Marina recounted everything. From the months of estrangement from Richard, through the couple's sudden entry into the examination room, Fiona's cruel words, and finally the physical assault. "He just stood there," Marina said, her voice breaking. "When she kicked me, when I fell, when I was bleeding on the floor begging for help, he just stood there, as if he were watching a movie, not his own pregnant wife being assaulted." Patricia meticulously noted everything, this testimony combined. With the security camera footage, the medical team's statements, and Richard's bribery attempt, formed a solid case. But she knew she needed more. "Marina, is there anything else you can tell me about their relationship? Anything that could establish premeditation or a pattern of behavior?" Marina thought for a moment, sifting through her memories of the past few months. It was then that she remembered something. "There was one time, about 3 months ago, that I received a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Richard and Fiona together at a restaurant. The message said, 'He was never yours.' I thought it was a prank or someone trying to provoke me. I deleted it and didn't tell anyone." Patricia leaned forward. "Do you still have that number? Could it have been sent from her phone?" I don't know. I think I can try to recover it from my phone's history. Please do. Any prior communication between her and you could be relevant. Meanwhile, on social media, public opinion was fiercely on Marina's side. Support groups were created. Women who had experienced domestic or obstetric violence shared their own stories. The conversation expanded from an individual case to their national discussion about how society protected pregnant women. An online petition was created calling for tougher laws against assailants of pregnant women. In 1 week, it had over 500,000 signatures. Demonstrations were organized in front of the courthouse where the case would be heard. Posters with photos of Marina and little Victoria were held by hundreds of people demanding justice. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later, enough time for Marina to physically recover and emotionally prepare to face her aggressors in court. During this period, she underwent intensive therapy sessions, not only to process the trauma of the assault, but also to deal with Richard's betrayal and the end of her marriage. Edward became a constant presence in her life. He visited her daily, accompanied her to medical appointments, and gradually rebuilt the bond that had been broken years ago. Helen and he also began talking again, cautiously at first, but with increasing openness about the quarrel that had separated them. The day of the trial dawned cloudy in London, as if the sky itself was heavy with the tension of the moment. Marina woke early, unable to sleep for more than a few hours. She looked at the crib beside her bed, where Victoria slept peacefully. The baby had been discharged from the neonatal ICU 3 weeks prior and was now healthy, gaining weight, and filling Helen's home with her tiny sounds. "Are you ready?" Helen asked, appearing at the bedroom door with a cup of tea. "I don't know if anyone can be ready for this," Marina replied, accepting the drink. "But I have to do it. For myself, for Victoria, for all the other women who went through something similar." Edward arrived an hour later to take them to the courthouse. During the drive, he explained to Marina what she could expect. Patricia had already prepared her in the days prior, but he wanted to make sure his niece knew exactly what she would face. "It's going to be broadcast live," Edward said carefully. "The judge authorized it because the case gained public interest. Are you okay with that?" Marina nodded. "I think so. If my story can help other women find the courage to speak out, then let it be public." When they arrived at the courthouse, Marina was impressed by the number of people gathered outside. Hundreds of women held signs with messages of support. Some cried as they saw her get out of the car. Others shouted words of encouragement. Marina felt tears burn her eyes, but she maintained her composure. She waved to the crowd before entering the building. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Marina saw Fiona sitting next to her lawyer, a man in an expensive suit known for securing acquittals in difficult cases. Fiona wore a discreet dress, without excessive makeup, her hair tied in a simple ponytail. It was an obvious attempt to appear humble and remorseful, but Marina saw through the facade. When their gazes met, Fiona quickly looked away. Richard was seated in another section, as he faced separate charges related to attempted obstruction of justice. He seemed to have aged years in the past few weeks. The impeccable man Marina had known was replaced by someone hunched with deep dark circles under his eyes and slightly trembling hands. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Robert Field was known for his rigidity, but also for his fairness. He had presided over some of London's most important cases in recent decades. He struck his gavel, and the trial began. Prosecutor Patricia presented the case with surgical precision. She showed the security camera footage, which, even after watching dozens of times during preparation, still made Marina feel nauseous. She presented the testimonies of the doctors and nurses who attended Marina, describing the severity of the injuries and the risk that both she and Victoria had faced. Then came Marina's testimony. She stood up, felt her legs tremble, but forced them to move. She walked to the front of the room, placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "Marina, can you describe to the court what happened on August 5th at St. Raphael's Hospital?" Patricia began. Marina took a deep breath and began to tell her story. She spoke about the months of estrangement from Richard, about the pregnancy that should have been a moment of joy, but became a period of loneliness. She described the couple's sudden entry into the examination room, Fiona's aggressive demeanor, the cruel words. She said I was pathetic, Marina recounted, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. That my daughter meant nothing, that I meant nothing. And then when I tried to move away from her, when I placed my hands protectively over my belly, she kicked me. The silence in the room was absolute. Not even the sound of breaths could be heard. What did you feel at that moment? Patricia asked softly. Fear. Marina looked directly at Fiona. Fear that my daughter would die inside me. Fear that I was living my last moments. And more than anything, a devastating loneliness, because my husband was there, seeing everything, and did absolutely nothing to help me. Marina's testimony lasted over an hour. She answered all of Patricia's questions and then had to face cross-examination from Fiona's lawyer, Mr. Augustus Reed. Ms. Anderson, he began, his voice soft but with a hint of skepticism, isn't it true that you and Ms. Davies had a verbal disagreement before the alleged assault? It wasn't a disagreement, Marina corrected. It was a unilateral verbal attack. She entered that room with the intention of humiliating me. But you admit there was a heated discussion. I admit she yelled at me, insulted me, and then physically assaulted me when I tried to protect myself. Mr. Reed tried several tactics, suggesting that Marina had provoked Fiona, that perhaps she had exaggerated the severity of the assault, that the stress of pregnancy might have distorted her memories. But Marina stood firm, answering each question with calm and clarity. Patricia had prepared her well. When finally released, Marina returned to her seat beside Helen. She felt exhausted, but also relieved. She had spoken her truth. Now it was time to hear what Fiona had to say. Fiona's lawyer called her as a defense witness. She stood and walked to the front with measured steps. When she began to speak, her voice was soft, almost fragile. I never meant to hurt anyone, Fiona said, looking at the jury. What happened that day was a moment of complete loss of control. I was emotionally distraught, dealing with feelings I didn't know how to process. When I saw Marina, when I saw her pregnant, something inside me just broke. She paused, as if fighting back tears. Marina recognized the performance for what it was, a rehearsed attempt to gain sympathy. I loved Richard, Fiona continued. I loved him for years, and when he chose to marry someone else, I tried to move on. But the pain never went away. That day, when he asked me to go with him to the hospital, I thought we finally had a chance to be honest with each other. I didn't imagine it would end that way. That doesn't justify what you did, Patricia interrupted during cross-examination. Emotional pain doesn't give you the right to assault a pregnant woman. I know that now, Fiona said softly, and I will carry this regret for the rest of my life. But Fiona's strategy of presenting herself as a victim of her own emotions didn't work as expected. Patricia presented the messages she had recovered from Marina's phone, showing that Fiona had deliberately harassed Marina months before the assault. She presented testimonies from Richard's former employees who witnessed Fiona's previous aggressive behaviors. The most devastating testimony came from Carla, the former secretary. She recounted the times Fiona called the office making veiled threats about how she had once appeared at Marina's house when she knew Richard wasn't there, just to intimidate her. She planned this, Carla said with conviction. It wasn't a moment of losing control. It was the culmination of months of jealousy and obsession. Richard was also called to testify. He admitted the extramarital affair with Fiona, admitted taking her to the hospital knowing Marina would be alone. When Patricia asked why he didn't intervene when he saw Fiona aggressively approaching Marina, he remained silent for a long moment. I froze, he finally said. It's not an excuse, I know. But when I saw what was happening, my brain just stopped working. The jury retired to deliberate at the end of the third day of the trial. Marina, Helen, and Edward waited in a private room, the silence heavy between them. Marina held a photo of Victoria, looking at her daughter's tiny face as if seeking strength in that image. No matter what happens, Helen said softly, you've already won. You survived, Victoria survived, and you both have a whole life ahead of you. But I need to know there will be consequences, Marina replied. Not just for me, but for all the other women who might go through this. I need to know that the system works. 2 hours later, the jury returned. Marina felt her heart quicken when everyone returned to the courtroom. The judge called for silence, and the jury foreman stood. In the case of the Crown against Fiona Davies, on the charge of grievous bodily harm and assault on a key, pregnant woman, the jury finds her guilty. A collective gasp swept through the room. Marina felt her legs weaken, and Helen held her arm to support her. Fiona remained motionless, her face pale, as her lawyer whispered something in her ear. The judge continued reading the other charges. Fiona was found guilty of all of them. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Field removed his glasses and looked directly at Fiona. "Your actions were premeditated, cruel, and directed against one of the most vulnerable victims possible," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "A pregnant woman, defenseless, who trusted in being safe within a hospital environment. The sense of entitlement demonstrated in your behavior, believing that your emotions justified physical violence against another person, is deeply disturbing." He paused, looking at the papers in front of him. "I sentence Ms. Fiona Davies to 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 5 years. Additionally, you will pay compensation to the victim in an amount to be determined in civil proceedings." Fiona collapsed in her chair, finally letting her mask of composure drop. Her weeping echoed through the room as she was led away by court officers. Richard faced a separate trial. Although not criminally responsible for the assault itself, he was convicted of attempted obstruction of justice related to his attempt to bribe the hospital security guard. He received a 2-year sentence in an open prison regime and had to pay a heavy fine. But perhaps his greatest punishment was the complete destruction of his reputation and businesses. After the trial, Marina gave her first press conference. She was nervous, but Patricia was by her side, as were Helen and Edward. Cameras flashed, journalists asked questions, but Marina focused on her message. "I don't want my story to be remembered only as a tragedy," she said, her voice firm. "I want it to be remembered as a turning point. For too long, assaults against pregnant women were treated as private matters, family affairs. But they are not. They are cowardly attacks that endanger not just one life, but 2. A journalist raised her hand. "Marina, what do you hope will change from now on?" Marina looked directly at the camera, thinking of all the women who might be watching, women who might be going through similar situations. "I hope no woman needs to go through what I went through to be taken seriously. I hope society understands that protecting pregnant women is not just about physical health, but about human dignity. And I hope that cases like mine inspire real changes in the law." And that's exactly what happened. 2 weeks after the trial, Patricia approached Marina with a proposal. She had gathered a group of legislators, women's rights activists, and healthcare professionals to draft a bill that would toughen punishments against assailants of pregnant women and guarantee additional protections in medical settings. "We would like the law to bear your name," Patricia said. "The Marina Anderson Act for the Protection of Pregnant Women. You inspired this. Your courage, your willingness to speak openly about what happened, all of this catalyzed a change that many of us had been trying to make for years." Marina was speechless. She looked at Victoria, who slept peacefully in her arms. "It would be an honor," she finally said. In the following months, Marina became an active voice in the campaign for the law's approval. She gave speeches, participated in debates, shared her story repeatedly, even when it hurt to relive those moments. Helen was always by her side, caring for Victoria when Marina needed to travel, offering emotional support when the memories became too heavy. Edward also became an advocate for the cause. He used his position as clinical director of St. Raphael's Hospital to implement new safety protocols for obstetric patients. He trained staff to identify signs of domestic and obstetric violence, created an environment where women felt safe to report abuse. But his greatest contribution came when he announced his retirement from the director position. At the farewell ceremony, he made a surprise announcement. "Throughout my career, I've seen a lot of pain that could have been avoided if we had better support systems," he told the assembled staff. "That's why I'm using my retirement to found a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of obstetric and domestic violence. And I'm proud to announce that my niece, Marina Anderson, will be its co-founder and executive director. Marina was in the audience and felt tears stream down her face when Edward called her to the stage. The NGO, named Victoria, after Marina's daughter, would begin operations in 3 months. It would offer legal, psychological and medical support to women who had suffered abuse during pregnancy or childbirth. St. Raphael's Hospital also announced the creation of a specialized ward for victims of violence. The ward would be equipped with specially trained professionals, enhanced safety protocols, and an environment designed to make patients feel protected and welcomed. At the inauguration, a bronze plaque was unveiled at the entrance, the Marina Anderson Ward, where courage transforms into hope. The Marina Anderson Act was approved 11 months after the trial. Marina was present at the signing ceremony, holding Victoria, who was now 1 year old and beginning to take her first steps. When the pen touched the paper, officializing the law, Marina felt as if a cycle was closing. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't completely heal the wounds, but it gave meaning to her pain. On the 2-year anniversary of the assault, Marina returned to St. Raphael's Hospital, not as a patient, but as a speaker at a symposium on obstetric violence. She walked through the corridors that once witnessed her pain, but now she saw them with new eyes. This was a place of healing, of second chances, of new beginnings. After the lecture, as everyone dispersed, Marina asked for a few minutes alone. She went, up to the 5th floor to the room where everything had happened. The room was empty, but it had been renovated, repainted, transformed. There were no longer any physical traces of that terrible day. Marina placed a small bouquet of flowers on the windowsill. It was a silent gesture, a way to honor all the women who had not survived violence, who had not had the chance to transform their pain into change. She stood there for a few minutes, in silence, letting the tears flow freely. When she finally left, Victoria was waiting in the corridor with Helen and Edward. The girl ran to her mother with still clumsy steps, her little arms outstretched. Marina picked her up, feeling the comforting weight of her daughter against her chest. "Ready to go home?" Helen asked softly. Marina looked back one last time, at the room where she had almost lost everything, but she hadn't lost. She had survived, fought, and transformed her tragedy into a legacy that would protect countless other women. "Yes," she replied, holding Victoria tighter. "I'm ready." They left the hospital together, 3 generations of Anderson women, united by trauma and love, but more than that, united by hope. Outside, the City of London continued to move. Cars honked, people rushed to their appointments. Life went on at its frantic pace. But now, in that city, there was a new law. There was a new organization dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. There was a hospital ward where women could feel safe. And there was a story, the story of Marina Anderson, which would continue to inspire change for generations. "You know you're my hero, don't you?" Helen said, as they walked towards the parking lot. Marina smiled, kissing Victoria's head. "I'm not a hero, Mom. I'm just a survivor who refused to let the worst moment of her life define the rest of it." "And that," Edward added, putting an arm around both their shoulders, "is exactly what makes you a hero." Marina looked at Victoria, who looked back with big, curious eyes. "You are the reason I survived," she whispered to her daughter. "You and all the other Victorias who will come after us." The sun was beginning to set over London, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was a new day ending, but also the promise of a new dawn. And Marina knew with every fiber of her being that every tear, every moment of pain, every second of struggle had been worth it. Because in the end, justice had prevailed. Love had conquered hatred. And from one of the darkest moments of her life, she had helped create light for countless others. Dear listeners, the journey of Marina, Helen, Edward, and little Victoria shows us that even in the most difficult moments, courage and love can transform pain into purpose. This story of overcoming and justice reminds us that we are never alone in our struggles. If Marina's story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring narratives that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Leave a like if this story made you reflect on the importance of protecting the most vulnerable. And in the comments, share your thoughts. Tell us what you felt while following this journey of pain, justice, and renewal. Every day we bring stories that explore the complexities of life, the challenges we face, and the resilience that defines us. Your presence here is part of this community of hearts connected by empathy. We await you in the comments to continue this important conversation. Until the next story.